We're currently involved in a stewardship study, and we'll be continuing that. Coming up, I'm going to be teaching a few weeks on technology, stewardship of technology, and I'm excited about that. Been putting my notes and thoughts together on technology, and technology is more than digital technology, and I want to kind of back up the picture and look at that. Technology is leveraging the resources of the earth to do something, all right? So as soon as Adam took a sharp rock and he attached it to a stick with a vine and started whacking weeds, that's technology, all right? So that's technology. And so I think it'll help us to just sort of back up, take a big picture view, and then we'll dial in a little bit tighter to digital technology and how we should steward that, how we should think about that, and I'm excited to get into that. But that's not today. I have to restrain myself and move forward. So we are going to do a little review. Most of you know that my wife and I just went on a trip over to Greece and Turkey as well, and it was called In the Footsteps of Paul, and I've put together a trip for those that are interested. Registration should have a registration link very soon for that. If you are interested in learning more about the Greece trip that we're putting together for next year, it'll be next May, June. I would love to talk more about that. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we were able to do and experience, and I've been reminded a couple times, I never really did like a full sabbatical review afterwards. Kristen reminds me of that a couple of times. She's reminded me of that. So I wanted to do a little bit of that, and it was kind of interesting. So if you're new here to the Sunrise family, the way that this all came about, last year the church gave us a sabbatical, so we were gone. I didn't preach for 13 weeks. I was gone out of Sunrise for 11 weeks. And it was just a fantastic time. David took a lot of the preaching load. Adam preached some, Jeff, and then we brought a few guys in as well. And it was just a fantastic time for our church, and I'm very grateful for that. Grateful that the church was able to do that for us. One of the pieces that we wanted to do as part of the sabbatical was some sort of an international trip to somewhere with some biblical history and significance. We're talking about Israel, look potentially like an Egypt trip, somewhere to do that, maybe even church history, England, something like that, Germany. And we kind of I settled on, I'd really love to do a Life of Paul sort of trip. And so I started looking into that, and then last year with all the COVID restrictions, and we just didn't know what life was going to look like, and we decided, hey, this is probably going to be more stressful than relaxing, trying to figure all this out right now, so we just punted that part. And so in conjunction working with the elders, we just said, hey, let's put that part on hold. And so this year came around, and it's a much better environment, conducive to travel international right now. And so I found this trip, and it was sort of the trip that I was hoping to put together. So I sort of started researching and said, what I want to see, what could we do, and started kind of piecing it together myself. And some of you have planned trips like this, or like international trips, where you're trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And then I stumbled across these folks called Imagine Tours and Travel. And they basically run logistics for you. And so you say, hey, I want to go to Greece for 10 days. And they're like, gotcha. And they run logistics for you. And I said, that sounds like a fantastic idea. So I started looking into that. And I actually joined a trip with another church. I didn't know what I was getting into. And it's just Mindy and me. So I'm like, if this is a total bust, like, it's just us. That's okay. So I found this trip. It was a pastor from Wisconsin. Everybody on the trip, I think, was Lutheran, and they were part of the Wisconsin Synod. I learned a little bit more about Lutheranism as I was on the trip. So I got in contact with this pastor. I just called him, said, hey, can I crash your party, join the trip? He said, sure. We talked a couple of times and seemed like a good fit, so we joined him. So we ended up meeting up with him over in Thessaloniki. When we flew in, hadn't met before then, and this was our trip. So joined with them, and it was just a fantastic time. And so just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. Just a couple of initial reflections, and this is more kind of sabbatical, big picture kind of stuff. And I won't spend too long on this, though. I think there's a lot more to say. I just wanted to express again how grateful I am to the church family for allowing us to do something like this, both in terms of funding, in terms of time away, for David, the other elders, and Leslie, for sort of making things possible for me to step away for a little bit. I'm just very, very grateful, not something I take for granted, and we're just very thankful. And then to be able to do a trip kind of 2 years in a row is just incredible, and and we're just very, very grateful and thankful for that. Just a couple of thoughts on work and rest. Nathan talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago when he was talking about stewardship of time. I joke with my kids sometimes when they say, I need to take a break, and I always say, from what? You can't take a break unless you've been doing something, right? So rest is good, but rest is only good if you've been doing things. Otherwise, you're just kind of living on perpetual break. That's not good. Work and rest are good, though, and it's good to put some borders and boundaries up and say, I'm going to work and I'm going to stop. That's a good thing. And I'm going to talk more about this when we get to it. Jesus interacts a lot with the Sabbath in the Gospel of Luke, so I won't do a full breakdown of that yet. But I would just say, just in principle, I'm not a fourth commandment Sabbatarian to tell you, you must do this, and you can't cut your grass, and you can't wash the dishes on Sunday. I know some of you would love for me to say that. Like, hey, honey, I can't, sorry. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that God's created us to work, and He has created us to need rest, and they're both good. The Sabbath was created for us, not us for the Sabbath. It's not a system that we're supposed to force into. It is a gracious provision by the Lord to allow us to rest, and so it's a good thing. So I'm not applying that strictly, but I am saying the principle of work and rest is good. And I think many of us, Luther used to talk about the drunk guy trying to get on the horse, go up one side and he'd fall off the other, kind of perpetually back and forth. I think many of us have this sort of relationship with work and rest. We work too much, we're like, I gotta stop. And then you get a taste of the not working, you're like, I can get used to this. That was one of the things when people ask me, coming back from sabbatical, like, how was it? I'm like, I think I'm gonna be good at being retired. Like, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed having some time just to decompress. So those are both good, and I can't tell you exactly what to do, but I will say you need to wrestle with this in your own heart, with your own family, and just have some accountability. Even thinking about work and rest, it's important. Plurality. Another thing that, and I mentioned this already, but I don't think this would have worked well if we didn't have plurality of elders here, and just having different people that can take the reins and can give leadership and make decisions. And I'm thinking particularly of last summer, just being able to pull away for an extended period. There were things that happened here. There were people that came to the church, actually a few. We actually talked about that. Like, what do you do if, we had that conversation. Like, what do we do if somebody comes and wants to join the church while you're gone? I said, well, at least make them listen to one sermon. Like, just make sure that this is, they can tolerate me. And then I guess that's fine. So it really isn't about me. This church isn't about me. It's not about David. It's not about any one elder. It's about the shared mission vision that we do, that we believe here at Sunrise. So I think that's very important. Much more to be said on that. And then moving a little bit more into just an overall reflection as I get started into what we're going to do today, purpose. This was a Life of Paul trip, and Paul was so driven. And as you'll see, he went from city to city to city, and he usually didn't end well. All right, usually didn't end well when he went to a city. He's lowered. It starts out bad. In Damascus, which is not somewhere I got to go this time. But it starts out bad when he starts talking about Jesus, and he starts to feel the heat from the people, and he has to be lowered out of the city wall. We'll see some of those city walls here in just a minute. He has to be lowered out of the city wall at night, and he runs off to the next city, and then he goes to Thessaloniki, and he has to run off, and he goes to Berea, and he just keeps bouncing from place to place to place. Philippi, he gets beaten and imprisoned. But he had such a sense of purpose. And even when he had his little layover of sorts in Athens, it really wasn't a restful, hey, I'm going to take the day, go see the sights of Athens. He begins to preach, and he begins to tell people that Jesus is the Messiah. So just such a sense of purpose. That was very challenging for me as I thought through this. So this was our trip. This was Paul's trip, and I'll show you where we interacted with this. So these are Paul's missionary journeys, and I know that's kind of it's a detailed map, but basically what this trip did is track, for the most part, with the second missionary journey. It did not go in order of Paul's missionary journey, but I'm going to show you the pictures in order just to give you a map and an overview of what's happening. So the reddish orangish line, that's the one you want to look at here. So on Paul's first missionary journey, you'll notice that it was pretty confined. That's the blue line here. So it's pretty confined to this little area. This is all considered Asia over here. This is Israel, Egypt down here. They would have come up this way during the Exodus event. Eventually, Sinai Peninsula right down here. So this is Africa, Asia, Europe over here. And so Paul's first missionary journey is sort of this little, just a little loop right here. And so what Paul wants to do on his second missionary journey is he wants to repeat the loop. He wants to go back and check on the churches that he had started. And he stopped. He receives a vision from the Lord called the Macedonian vision. And he's not allowed to preach the gospel in Asia. Seems like a very unmissional kind of thing to happen, right? No, Paul, you can't preach the gospel in Asia anymore. I have another plan for you. And so that's what happens. So he ends up making his way over to Troas, and then from there he sails over to Neapolis, a little city that we saw. There's not much biblical history there, it just tells us he stopped there. And then it makes his way to Philippi up here. And it's here where we have the first European convert, and that would be Lydia. So this is a little bit more detail of... So he sails in here and then makes his way to Philippi. We stayed in Thessaloniki. Ancients call it Thessaloniki. In Greece, they call it Thessaloniki. We tend to call it Thessalonica. Tomato, I don't know. Whatever makes you happy. So Thessaloniki is here. So we stayed there, and then our first stop was up here in Philippi. So this was the account, Acts 16, and they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. A vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So that's the story I was just telling about. So they end up in Troas and then bounce over to Neapolis, and eventually to Philippi. Interesting here, just a footnote, not relevant necessarily, but Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and also Acts, he switches back and forth sometimes from Paul, like third person, and then he'll also use we or us. So we know that Luke was part of at least some of the journeys of Paul. So let's go over to Europe. We left the first missionary journey. That's probably, after the first missionary journey is probably where the book of Galatians comes from. Now we're stepping into the second missionary journey, and we meet Paul in Philippi. And he preaches the gospel, and in the first recorded convert in Europe is a woman, which in that culture and in writing history in that day, that wasn't a cool thing to start with. Sort of like the apostles start out telling the story, and who were the first to witness the resurrected Christ? It was the women. It's like, you're not supposed to do that. What do they know? And that's, culturally, that was, I don't mean that. I was like expressing a worldview that's old. My wife's not here. Y'all have to rein me in this morning. This is it's just so interesting that the first convert is recorded, and unashamedly recorded, to be a woman named Lydia. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul, and after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. So they're in Philippi. This lady named Lydia hears the gospel, and she's baptized. Now they think this little river where she was baptized has probably changed courses a few times over the centuries. We're talking 2,000 years ago. But pretty likely this was the river, at least. Maybe not this exact location. So they've built this little area where you can come visit. Philippi is a little nothing town. I mean, there's not much to it. There's a few little cafes and archaeological sites, and you can buy some some Lydia dye trinkets, at the gift shop. It's more like a folding table, kind of thing. I mean, it's really not much to see. And it's actually not really purple. It's more like a reddish color. Translates for us in purple, but it's really more like a burnt orange kind of look. So for what that's worth. So this is most likely, at least in the area where Lydia would have been baptized. There's us at the baptism spot. What we would do along the way is, as we would go to these spots that had biblical correspondence, we would stop and we would read the passage that was relevant. So just like we just read Acts 16, we would stop and read the relevant passages, and then one of the guys from the group would give just a little devotional thought. So Pastor Newman, and then there was a couple other guys. One guy, this guy's, he's in training to be a pastor, and then there was another guy that just started seminary, and he would also lead some of the devotional thoughts as well. So it was just really neat being there, like touching the water, where Lydia was years ago, but in that general area. There's now been a church that's built, and the church is basically one big baptismal type of thing. It's not, they call it a church, it's not really a church proper. The Greek Orthodox, 97% of the country is Greek Orthodox. So after World War I, there was a population swap that happened with the Turks. And so all of the Christians from Turkey went to Greece, and all of the Muslims from Greece went to Turkey. And so now you have, it's pretty much, if you're alive and breathing, you're Greek Orthodox. But they put so much in your baptism, so much stock into the baptism. As our guide's standing here walking us around, and this is the inside of this little area, and I've got another picture here in just a second, but it's basically just this little, and they'd probably be insulted by this, but it looks like a little bird bath, like right in the middle. Just this little porcelain, it's, everything's marble. It's this marble, it's pretty, but they don't practice baptism by immersion, like the Baptist would, and we are Baptist in that sense, but they would practice baptism by sprinkling. And so that's what happens here. People come out here to be baptized. That's pretty much what it is. All Greek Orthodox. So this place was built in the 70s. It's not that old. It's very pretty. Everything's marble. That's just what they have in the mountains over there. So they start mining, and that's what they find is marble. The streets, many of the sidewalks are marble. The hotel steps will be marble. Countertops are all marble. Like everything's marble. If you love marble, you will find your home in Greece. So this is on the floor when you walk in. I know it's not a great picture. I just wanted to show it to you. This is a mosaic, so every one of those little colors are little tiny stones that have been placed there. So it's this mosaic, and it's Paul's missionary travels, and so it's a map of his missionary journeys. It's really neat. I walked in and I told Minnie, I'm like, I feel like I'm going to Mordor. It looks kind of like a Lord of the Rings kind of thing. For those that aren't Lord of the Rings people, we're back. Okay, so that's the inside. Up top, it's just really beautiful. Most all the churches are built something like this, where they have if you start in a particular place, they walked us through, each panel tells a story of like a missionary story or story of Christ. It's a story, and so you have a starting point and ending point. And this is traditionally, the church has done this, like stained glass windows. They've done this in order, one, to preserve the stories, and just to remind the people of the stories. And then two, there were, at different times, in different places, there was large illiteracy rates. And so people that didn't read, they could just look at the pictures and be reminded of the biblical stories. And so churches were built in this way. So that's the baptismal. A little ways down the road is actual Philippi, the archaeological site. This is a lot of the cities have like an amphitheater stadium type of thing, and so that's what we're looking at there. Pretty large. There was more at Philippi than I expected there to be. I think there was more people in ancient Philippi than current day Philippi. It was pretty impressive, the archaeological sites. All of these places, some of it's been restored, some of it is obviously original. But underneath, if you guys, has anybody been to Rome? Just curious, I know a few of you guys have seen the Colosseum. They have all the underneath, like the tunnels, and it's pretty impressive. Or if you watch Gladiator, I don't know. Can we talk about that here? I think that's fine. If you watch Gladiator, they had the tunnel system and the little elevator where they would lift, the gladiators up and like animals and that sort of thing. Most of these amphitheaters actually had some sort of a system like that. So there's an underground underneath, and that's what this is leading to. So underneath, and there were a couple of spots. You couldn't really get good pictures of it, but there are a couple of spots where you can kind of peer in and you can see this like kind of tunnel system underneath with this pulley system where they could lift and. Pretty amazing. Architecture is pretty amazing, what they were able to do back then. It's hard in places because these cities were inhabited for centuries, so it's hard in places to know exactly what would Paul have seen versus what was later like Roman occupation, what was later added. But whenever you see an arch, it's most likely Roman. All right, Romans love their arches, so they told us that. So you come out of the amphitheater. And I'm facing it here, kind of back behind me. The entranceway would have looked something like this. And so then you walk down. And I just have a few different pics. I don't have explanation for every one of these, just to give you a sense of what it was like. It's still being excavated. This is a live excavation site, and you can see that. You can see that in a couple places. Off in the distance, you might be able to see that. And then there's another spot where you'll be able to see that. As well. They estimate that Philippi is about 20% excavated. So there's a lot of stuff still to dig up over there. And I was amazed by that because we heard this different numbers in different places. I was amazed because I always thought, like, what are modern archaeologists doing? Like, haven't we dug up everything? I mean, they've had 2,000 years. Like, get a shovel. Like, what are you doing? Apparently it's not that easy. So I was kind of amazed by that. Only 20% excavated. And then they get into like permitting issues, and a lot of people have property and they own the houses. And so like Corinth butts up to this neighborhood, like ancient Corinth. And so these houses are literally built on who knows what. Could have been the meat market that Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 8. There's a whole road that goes up to the temple of Aphrodite. It's like somebody's house is sitting on the road. So they can't just go dig it up. So it's a delicate issue. And some people have issue. I mean, if you own your plot of land and they said, hey, too bad, this is an important historical spot, you gotta go. I mean, what would you do with that? So that's what's going on. It was in Philippi where Paul cast the demon out of the slave girl. You might remember that. And another thing that struck me, because this happens a few different places, there was typically, there's more than once, I'll just say it this way, there's more than once where it's obvious economic incentive to get Paul out of town. All right? Obvious economic incentive. In the story of Philippi, Paul cast the demon out of the slave girl who was able to predict the future, and as soon as they do that, her owners were not happy with Paul because they lost their source of income. And so they have Paul arrested, have him beaten. They are not pleased with Paul at all. And when they inflicted many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Having received this order, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. And this is the scene where Paul and Silas says, at midnight they were praising God, singing hymns. They have the earthquake. The jail is opened up, and the jailer's about to kill himself, about to fall on his own sword. Paul says, hey, wait, we're all here. He says, why didn't you run? Tell me more. Shares the gospel with him. He gets saved. Daylight comes, and then he's baptized, his household's baptized, starts telling everybody what about this Paul character. Word makes its way back up to the officials, and he says, would you just leave? Paul, okay, can you just go now? Like, we don't need any more of all this. This is one of the spots I think Paul could have been held in prison. Our guy didn't think this was accurate for what it's worth. I don't know. But maybe. So this is one of the spots that potentially could have been a prison back in the day. We don't know for sure. And I'll tell you the end of the Paul's leaving Philippi story in just a moment. So most of the cities have what's called an agora. So if you read the term agora in the New Testament, it refers to like the market. So the cities were built like this. And I captured a picture, I think, here. So this isn't the greatest photography in the world, but I just wanted you to see this. So where I'm standing, you can see the little slabs that go down. This was the Roman road, all right? So the Roman road would run right beside them. So to my left, you can see what's like the knee-high wall. That would have been much taller back in the day. And so the road would run right by a city, and there would basically be a gate where you could go into the city. And different cities had different, size walls and gates and all of that. But they walked along and then would go into the city. And so it usually opened up, like one of the gates would open up into the agora, which was like the gathering place, the marketplace. There'd be an amphitheater. It's just where you did your life. And so this is the ancient agora. You can see the pillars going down where one of the temples would have been. I can't remember which one that was or if they know which one that was. And so this is, and you can see like the green tents, like the chain set up. This is still a live excavation site, so they're working on it actively right now. This is another place that they're currently working. They built this structure to protect the workers from the sun and the weather as they work. They are currently uncovering this. This was a church, and they think it was the first church that was dedicated to the Apostle Paul. So this would have been, of course, after Paul left, many years after. So they found this, and they started digging, looking around, and they found this mosaic floor, this floor that's underneath, and it's still being uncovered. You can see another picture of that. And I know you can't really see the writing at the bottom, but it's a dedication to the Apostle Paul. And so this whole area is actually covered in that mosaic, and it's just taken a long time for them to kind of unearth it. So Paul leaving Philippi then. So I told you the story. He gets beaten, thrown in prison. Angels, the earthquake happens. Shackles fall off. They're free. They don't run. Jailer gets saved. He's making a stir in the city. And then they just wanted to leave. But when the magistrates sent the police saying, "Let those men go," and the jailer reported these words to Paul saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace." Paul said, "No, I'm not leaving." But Paul said to them, "They've beaten us publicly, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No. Let them come themselves and take us out." Like, get down here and apologize. And they do. The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. Okay, well, that's nice. They're pretty pleased would you leave. So they went out of prison and visited Lydia, and then when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed. So much to think about here in terms of Christians and their interaction with the government and things like that. There's some interesting things happening here. He's calling on the government to do the right thing. Like, hey, no, that's not right. You know it's not right. You beat me without reason. Get down here and apologize. I'm not just leaving town. I'm not making it easy on you. I love that. I think there's something to be said for that. So they left. They do end up leaving Philippi, and they would have taken this Roman road, would have been the road that they were on. So this is a little ways down the street. They pulled us up. This is one of the well-preserved areas of the Roman road. So we're kind of on a bus, and there's this little, we're kind of in this parking area off to the side, and there's this road that kind of works its way down, and then you can see the Roman road kind of under it. And I saw it, and I looked at Mindy, I was like, I gotta go down there. But the rest of the group wasn't going down there. I was like, I gotta go to the Roman road. So I took off, and then there's me. The rest of the group standing up on there, like, how do you get down there? I'm like, hi. And then I ran back up. Like, I just want to walk on the Roman road, like Paul did. So I did. So they went to the Roman road. That's how they would have traveled. And there's all kinds of debates about like where the roads led and different stops along the journey and that sort of thing. And so now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. So we're back here. And so this was Philippi. They went through Amphipolis, and then they went to Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki. He's going to go to here, and then he's going to backtrack to Berea before he goes down to Athens. So that's where we are in the journey. So Thessaloniki is one of the churches in the New Testament where Paul doesn't have much negative to say about them. It's very positive. The first letters of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, which we studied here as a church family not that long ago, very, very positive. There's not as much to see there in Thessaloniki. It honestly wasn't my favorite city. Like, it's kind of a little bit run down. It's kind of dirty. But it's ancient, and some pretty cool things to see still. So these are one of the ancient walls. These were probably reconstructed around the 4th century. So just for what that's worth. I took this picture just because it was just so striking to me. That's the ancient city wall and a modern building built on top of it. Like, when I think of something old, I think of like St. Augustine, When they talk about old stuff, they're talking about 2,000 years or more. Pretty amazing. And so you'll see this everywhere. You'll just be walking along, modern building, McDonald's, Starbucks, ancient agora, right here in the city. It's just mind-boggling to me. This is just the little city square there in Thessaloniki. I thought that was kind of pretty and cool. This is the agora. So again, every city pretty much has one of these, like a city center. Amphitheaters to the left, and this is just kind of right there in the middle of the city. This is where, when Paul preaches in Thessaloniki, a little bit of a riot breaks out, and they end up arresting Jason, his host, because they can't find Paul. And they hold him. He has to put up bail money, and then they eventually would release him. And Paul hears about this, and they send him out of town. And so he would have gone out of these city walls. This is kind of the top of the city, and the city walls. Most of them look like this. So again, it's just this collision of ancient and modern. You can see in Thessaloniki, you can see kind of where the corners are. They would put these gigantic, round watchtower types of things. And you can trace this one. I don't have a good picture of it, but you can trace it down the hill, and you can see where the other one would have been. So you can kind of see the footprint of the ancient city. One of the things I was thinking about as we were in Thessaloniki and seeing these walls, I was thinking about 1 Thessalonians 1, where it talks about when Paul preached the gospel, it says, "And you turn from idols to worship the true and the living God." When they say turn from idols, I think most of us, we immediately like idols of the heart, kind of thing, lust and pride, and arrogance and envy and whatever. That's true, but that meant they stopped going to the idol temple. In the context of a closed city, there were 10 to 20,000 people in Thessaloniki, most likely, at the time. You couldn't really hide, all right? If you just all of a sudden stopped going to the temple, the idol temple, which is what everybody did. All the cool kids were there. You wanted to buy and sell and trade. It was interlocked with going to the idol temple. That was the issue in Corinth too. So it's interlocked with that. So all of a sudden these Christians are breaking away from that. And it's in the context of living in a walled city. It's not like you could just, these people are giving me a hard time. I'm going to, move to Pensacola. It didn't work that way for most people. There was some mobility, but not a lot. And so this is the world they lived in. This is the city walls. I took a video, I won't show it this morning, but watching these buses go through the ancient city walls, there's like 6 inches on either side. And there's a part of me that's like, this is really impressive. There's another part of me that says, I want to be on a bus that took out the Thessaloniki wall. This is a great story. I don't really, because I appreciate archaeology and history, but somebody's going to do it. It's just too tight. Anyways. So they go from there to Berea. So they get run out of Thessaloniki. Very positive experience in terms of the church. Very negative experience in terms of the wider culture reception in Thessaloniki. So here we are again, and they go from Thessaloniki, which is here, back up to, actually this way, to Berea. So that's they move on to Berea, and then are eventually going to go down to Athens. Not a lot to see in Berea, not a lot of ancient remains and artifacts there. Acts 17 records, the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. When they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Now, I don't really know exactly what to make of this, but there was a striking difference between the city of Berea and the city of Thessalonica. Thessalonica was a little bit dumpy, like trash all over the streets, just kind of smelled bad. We go to Berea, it's like pretty and clean and nice. And I'm muttering things under my breath the whole time to my wife. I'm like, they are more noble-minded here in Berea. It's much nicer, much cleaner place. That's just really interesting. I don't know what to do with that, but hey, for what it's worth. So they built this little monument to Paul because of his stop there. This is the city street. Again, not much to see. There is a synagogue on the outskirts of town that they are actively uncovering, but we didn't get to see that. So this is Berea. He makes his way from Berea down to Athens, and this was quite a trip. And I've talked about Athens before, so I won't spend too much time on this, but a lot to see in Athens. There's a big debate about how exactly did Paul get to Athens. What part did he sail? What part did he take the road? I'm going to leave that for other people to debate, but he does make it to Athens eventually. Those who conducted Paul, probably Bereans, brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So on Easter Sunday this past year, I preached Acts 17, so I won't repeat all of that for you. But Athens was so full of idols and temples. Some estimate there could have been up to 70,000 idols in the city. Amazing. The city name, Athens, where does it come from? Very nice. Athena, right? So it's named after the goddess, Athena. I'm in your territory now too, Zach, right? Yeah. So it was very religious, named for Athena, and it's just full of temples. So it's here that Paul is walking around the Agora, which Athens has as well. And there's the temple of Vulcan, there's Athena's temple, there's temple of Zeus. And so all of these temples are everywhere. All these little idols are everywhere. And so Paul uses that as an intro into his lesson. He's eventually invited to come and speak at Mars Hill. This is just a couple of shots. We got there. It was at night when we got into Athens. Most reasonable humans just went straight to the room and went to bed. I'm like, I'm going to see the town. So I just took off. My wife's like, you're crazy. I said, I know. So I just went and walked for, I don't know, hour and a half in Athens, just looking around, seeing the sights, taking it in. So I just took a couple pictures at night. This wasn't an official tour. It was just walking around, seeing the sights at night. And again, it's this mix of ancient and modern, just kind of collide in different places. So here's a couple of places where that happens. Our official visit here to Athens. So in Athens, the whole hill, or the hill where all the important buildings are, the Temple of Athena, the Parthenon, and the other buildings that were up there, is called the Acropolis. So that's kind of the rock, is the Acropolis. Just down from that, it's all on this hillside, and just down from that is Mars Hill. And so this is Mars Hill. The big rock is Mars Hill. So that's where we are from there. From there, so I'm standing on Mars Hill at this point, and you're looking up at the Acropolis. Temple of Athena is to the left, Parthenon's kind of back over the shoulder to the right, and then the entranceway is there in the middle. There's us at Mars Hill. We're standing on Mars Hill. So this is where Paul addressed the people of the city. They were curious about him preaching the resurrection, and you remember he's speaking to two different groups, the Epicureans and the Stoics. I think he's tailoring his message particularly to them, the Epicureans and the Stoics. Epicureans, they believed that the gods were real, but they believed that they were real in the sense that they were the physical thing they were made of. Okay, so they were real, but not real in the spiritual sense in the same way. So when Paul says, "In Him we live and move and have our being," and he's using their own poets to use that to say that, he's saying that our God's he's not an idol that's made by hands. He's kind of poking them in the eye, when he's making an argument against their worldview when he's doing this. Pretty amazing stuff that he's doing. They think, and I've heard this, I don't know, I think the history is a little bit debated. So if you read Acts 17, you can read Paul's whole speech in about 2.5, 3 minutes, something like that. They had basically like an hourglass, but it was water. And it was a 6-minute timer. So when you stood up, on sort of like in, congressional hearings and things today, it's like, you have 3 minutes, go, or however long they are. And so Paul had his timer, and they would have a timer, and they would flip it, and like, all right, make your case, go. And they would sit back and watch. And so Paul's probably on the clock. So this is probably a pretty crafted, like thought out, tight speech that he gives. Like, what do I want to cover? And he's like, this is it. He probably sat down, made some notes, and like, boom, here it is. Here's my TED Talk. kind of deal. And so that's what he does. And he gives a speech. And there's other places where we kind of get hints. Luke gives us hints that he talked for much longer, but we only have sort of a truncated version of that. That's probably not what happened in Acts 17. This is probably it. Probably for the most part what he had, this speech. And so he goes after all sorts of things, and then some, of course, reject what he's saying. They mock him. Some are curious, and then some believe. They're in Athens. Just a couple other pictures from Athens. This is that's the Temple of Athena. This is the Parthenon. Parthenon was actually, it was a long history with the Parthenon. So the Parthenon was, it was used at one point as like a military storage cache when they're under attack by the Turks. And there's like a huge deposit of like war material, bombs and such, gunpowder and things. The Turks are sitting on the other hill and they're bombarding this hill, the Acropolis, and they hit one of the munition things, and it blows out the side of the Parthenon, the other side. And so that's probably a lot of the reason why we have what we have today. So they're working to restore it. But it's pretty amazing. The top, I don't have any pictures of this, but the top of the Parthenon, it all was paintings, this relief that's in the background, and it tells a story like the stories of the gods and goddesses, and it goes all the way around. It actually tells a whole story. The Acropolis Museum is incredible. It's worth seeing. So this is Temple of Athena with the olive tree, and our Greek mythology majors can tell us the significance of the olive tree. Isn't that right, Zach? Why they give us the olive tree? What's the significance of the olive tree in Athena?
It was Athena's gift to Athens to allow her to sponsor them.
Yep. What's that?
Knowledge. I'm impressed.
I know. He's on it. I knew you would know that. I wouldn't ask you if I didn't know you knew. There's a lot of that story as well. So that's what we did in Athens. So the last day is when we visited Athens, and Mindy and I, we got permission to ditch the group for the day, which was great. They went to Delphi, which is really cool in and of itself, but we decided not to do that. There's not as much biblical history there. And I was able to get connected through a mutual friend with a pastor over there, Pastor Yodis. And I was able to meet with him for about an hour, and it was really cool. I learned more about Greek Orthodox Church talking to him than I did the whole time being there. So he's got this church, and it's right there in the heart of Athens. It's a Reformed Presbyterian church. And I walk in to meet with him, and his assistant walks me into this little library area, and I walk over to the books. I'm just kind of browsing around, and I'm like, I think I found my guy. He's for real. I'm looking at his books, and I know a lot of the authors, and so we ended up talking. Mindy told us we're a bunch of nerds. We started talking about books and authors and things, and it was just a ton of fun. Now this again, it's not a good picture, but I just want to give you context. So I'm standing in the area that was the Temple of Zeus here. That's First Evangelical Church right there, the white building right in front, and then in the background is the Acropolis. So he's just like right there in the heart of Athens, preaching the gospel, doing good work. For the trip that I'm putting together next year, I've got him signed up to actually spend some time with our group on that last day, just to talk to us and tell us about ministry there in Athens. And so we were able to meet with him, pray with him. It was just a really cool time. So Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he went to Corinth, and I think it's important to note, at the time, Corinth was the city, all right? Corinth was the New York, the LA. Corinth was the place. Athens was significant, but Athens was actually in a little bit of decline at this point in the first century. Still very historic, very notable, very important city. But Corinth was the place. Corinth was the city where everybody wanted to be. They estimate it could have been 400,000 to 800,000 people in Corinth at the time, which by ancient standards is just an absolute megacity. And so Paul goes to Corinth, and the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you. No one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in the city who are my people, and you stay there a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them." So that's Corinth. Corinth is on an isthmus, so there's this little juts out of land, and they've now put a canal in, but this is in the 1800s. Back in the day, they would have brought boats. See if I have them. I don't have a map there. They would have brought boats, and they would have taken the boats across the land. It's a few miles, 4 or 5 miles. They would have taken the boats, basically trailer them, pull them across land into the sea, and it would have saved them having to sail all the way around. So it's very, very important. They built a canal there now where you can get through. We had lunch on a little spot sitting right there at the canal and watched a couple boats go through. It was really neat. So in Corinth, much to say about that. I'll just show you a couple of things. This was interesting. So when you walk into this little area, they have now uncovered all of these little terracotta body parts. So like legs, arms, there's reproductive organs, there's all sorts of things that they've recovered. A lot of them. And they're like, what were these for? So what would happen, the temple of Apollo, and then there was another temple as well, you would go there for healing. And as tribute, you would bring the ailing, like a terracotta mold of the thing that was ailing you. So if your leg was hurting, you'd bring a leg. If your arm was hurting, you'd bring an arm. And so there's a few of these. They found quite a few of these now at the temple there. So when Paul is talking about the different members of the body of Christ, what does he use? He says you're like the body of Christ, the body part. One has a hand, one's a foot, one's an arm, one's an eye. He's like, what use is a hand that's not connected to the arm? They had a whole room of these things sitting around. Pretty neat, huh? Paul is just grabbing pieces and parts of like, oh, this would connect well, and he uses it. He talks about the idols, the food sacrificed to idols. We walked through. He's like, this is where the meat market was. This is where they made sacrifice. You wanted a steak, you bought it here. Christians started to disagree over what do you do if you know it's sacrificed to an idol. It was right there. And so much of Paul's teaching is just embedded into the culture that he's living in. This was one of the temples. This was Temple of Apollo. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I think I showed this picture, but these columns are unique because they're one piece. Most of the columns were multiple pieces that were joined together. These are one piece. I think most of us would throw our backs out trying to work on that. Pretty impressive. There's us, just a couple of pictures from Corinth. They estimate that Corinth is 5% excavated. 5%. So a lot left to uncover there in Corinth. So maybe years to come, if you ever get to go, you probably would see more than I did. This was the Bema seat. So when Paul talks about a Bema seat judgment, he didn't pull that term out of midair either. This is where the Roman proconsul would sit, Gallio, in Acts 19, when he makes a judgment. You remember Sosthenes is the leader of the synagogue, and he brings charges. They bring charges against Paul, and they get in front of him. This would have been the place where they would, this was much more built out. You see that white marble slab. Up on top of that would be a seat, and then everybody would be below them. He would hear their case, and they bring these charges against Paul. Gallio hears it, and before Paul's about to speak, and he says, I don't want to hear it. This has to do with Jewish traditions and customs and naming of your gods. I really don't care. Whatever. And he walks away. All right? They get mad at Sosthenes because he's the leader of the synagogue, and they're like, you didn't deliver. You were supposed to get Paul banished. You were supposed to get him punished. And so it says they whip Sosthenes. That would have been right here. This was a whipping post. So they were required to hug the whipping post, and they were beaten right there in front of everybody. So this is right there in front of the Bema seat, the seat of judgment. So when Paul starts talking about the judgment seat, the Bema seat, very real. They understood this very, very well. So that's Corinth. Pretty amazing. There's a lot to see. It all kind of starts looking the same after a little while. So I won't show you too much of this, but there is a story with each part of that. So I think we'll have to stop with this one. We might make it through. So then on to Ephesus. We went to Ephesus. Let me see if I've got that. Yeah. So Ephesus is technically in Asia now. So we jumped back across. So this is, he went from Corinth, then over here to Ephesus. He makes two different stops in Ephesus. We see in Acts 18 and Acts 19. So two different times he's in Ephesus. And then the second time he's trying to get back to Jerusalem before the Passover, he tells us. So Ephesus was a major city there in Turkey. Went to this port, Kushadashi is how you pronounce that. Lot to see in Ephesus. It was a major, major, major city. In the ancient world, the city was almost completely destroyed by an earthquake. And so now they're working to rebuild ruins and remains. Everything fell. And so they're working to stand things back up and kind of try to, it's like a gigantic, you guys that love puzzles, you probably love this. It's a gigantic puzzle, like trying to figure out what piece went with what over there. And so these columns, there's just things everywhere, just kind of laying around that they're trying to piece back together. Ephesus was a very important city. Ephesus is the city. Church history and tradition tells us that the Apostle John, after the ascension of Christ, he took Mary, Jesus' mother, to Ephesus. It's not in the Bible, but they think that. The Catholics believe, I didn't get a picture of it, but looking that way off to the left, they believe that that is the mountain where Mary was assumed into heaven and she didn't die. She was assumed into heaven like Jesus was. The assumption of Mary, they believe that happened there. Which you guys know me well enough to know I don't believe that happened, but I do believe the fact that you have multiple lines of church history that all tell us Mary was there, that becomes important. That becomes significant and pretty reliable. I just showed you this because I thought it was interesting. The columns are different pieces, as I mentioned, and this is how they would put them together. They're kind of like this peg and lock system, kind of like an old IKEA, right? Very heavy IKEA. This like lock system they had. Just a couple other pictures from Ephesus. It had one of the greatest libraries in the world, and they're working to reconstruct this as well. This was the library down at the end of the road. Just amazing, amazing to see. Had the third largest amphitheater in the world. So when you read in Acts 19 that there was a mob that formed, and they're all mad at Paul, and they call this gigantic riot, and all the people come rushing out, and they all take their spots up here, and this is where they were. The acoustics is unbelievable. You could stand at the top and talk, and you could hear down at the bottom. Just amazing. So we sat up there. I just sat there for a little while and read, thinking about what was going on there. And then lastly, just wanted to show you what Turkish coffee looks like. Because that's important. Stuff's like rocket fuel. If you're ever over there, get you some. Just word to the wise, leave that last eighth of a cup. It will kill you. All right. Okay. Few reflections, and then we're done. One, I was just impressed again. The Bible is true. It really happened. Every time they dig something up, it confirms something they found in Scripture. Every time. And they keep finding these inscriptions. They found this inscription in Corinth that confirms what the Bible said, confirms the timeline. It's amazing. Mission, as I mentioned earlier. I love Paul's single focus on sharing the gospel of Christ. Just the mission. And then understanding a little bit of our context. We see Paul's context. We see that he has a way of understanding what's going on in the world around him and using that and leveraging that in order to make gospel arguments. Not to weaken the message, not because the gospel needs help. He's just grabbing things that would have been familiar language, using ordinary language, using ordinary illustrations. I think Jesus does much of the same. We'll see that even in the Psalms this morning, grabbing normal ways of speaking to people that they would have understood. Very meaningful, had a lot of impact on me looking at that. Well, I intended to open it up for questions, but I used all the time, so sorry. All right, I'm going to pray for us, and we'll let you go. Lord, thanks so much for your word. We thank you that it is true. Lord, we don't need archaeology to confirm these things to be true for us. We believe it's true because your word says it. But how incredible and how confirming it is for us to see again and again and again what your word says is proven to be true, even by people who don't want it to be true, who try to poke holes in it. They have to come back and say, yeah, that's accurate. And so, Lord, we rest in that today, and we do believe in your word. We believe in the power of your word, and it's with that we come this morning, and we look forward to our next hour to look at your word. You've been changing lives for thousands of years through the preaching and teaching of your gospel. We pray that you would continue to do that, even in this place today. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right. You have to listen to me again.
3 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we're taking 3 weeks off. So don't come to 9 o'clock for the next 3 weeks, and then we'll start back in August. Thank you.